One quiet evening on the outskirts of Lancaster, a pregnant black nurse, Monica Carter, pulls into a dimly lit gas station to refuel. Her 10-year-old son sits quietly in the back seat. What should have been just another routine stop after a long shift quickly takes a dark turn. Two white officers approach with cold smiles and sharper gazes. What begins as innocent suspicion soon escalates into real danger. But just as the situation teeters out of control, a pair of headlights slices through the night. And when her brother steps out of the car, the officers will regret choosing the wrong family to harass. Drizzle taps gently on the windshield of the silver Honda Accord, each drop a soft, rhythmic sound, lulling the suburban city to sleep. But for Monica Carter, tonight is far from peaceful. The clock reads just after 9:30 p.m. She has just finished a 12-hour shift in the River Valley ER, where acute wounds never stop and life and death are separated by mere heartbeats. Monica pulls into gas station number 6, south of Route 43, an old, rusty station with a leaky canopy and flickering fluorescent lights casting yellow pools of light on the wet pavement. As she shuts off the engine, the hum fades, leaving a strange silence, an unnatural quiet that feels more like emptiness, as if the very air is holding its breath, waiting for something wrong. She sighs, placing a hand on her growing belly where her daughter is developing inch by inch. The 6th month is slowing her movements, but Monica doesn't complain. Being a mother for the 2nd time, this time alone, is a journey of resilience and solitude, but it also strengthens her every time she feels on the brink of breaking. In the car, Elijah sits in the back seat, legs curled up, eyes fixed on his tablet screen. He's practicing his spelling, mouthing each word as he writes, still holding his inhaler close by. Elijah has struggled with asthma since childhood, and the crisp early winter air isn't kind to a black boy living in a damp climate like Lancaster. Monica knows this. She keeps a close watch on every cough, every labored breath, every small sound from her son. Mommy's just going to grab a bottle of water. 2 minutes, okay? Monica taps lightly on the backseat window, her eyes soft but weary. Elijah looks up, pulling his mask down slightly. I'm fine. I'm practicing for my spelling test tomorrow. Monica smiles, a soft smile, the kind only mothers working night shifts can understand, the kind that persists when the body is weary but the heart keeps going for someone else. Good job. Don't forget to lock the door. I'll be right back. She opens the door, stepping out slowly, feeling her feet and back ache with every movement. Her navy scrubs dampen from the persistent drizzle, the fabric sticking lightly to her belly, revealing the curve of the baby growing inside her. The badge on her chest sparkles in the light, Monica Carter, RN. As she inserts the gas nozzle, a cold breeze brushes her skin, making her shiver. A strange scent wafts by, not the smell of gasoline, not the musty scent of concrete, but something that chills her spine, something instinctual, a scent of danger no mother, no black woman, no healthcare worker who's witnessed too much injustice could mistake. She looks around. The station is eerily still. No attendant. The convenience store is dark. No one in sight, no cameras. Just the flickering neon light at the corner of the canopy and the sound of the rain dripping as if counting down. Her stomach tightens with each breath, as if the baby inside her senses something is amiss. Then, from the left corner of the lot, headlights gently illuminate the space. Slowly, quietly, a patrol car that must have been parked there for some time, silent as a shadow. And now, 2 pairs of eyes from inside the car are fixed on her every move. Monica knows that look all too well. She's cared for patients with bruises from batons. She's heard the stories from pregnant black women handcuffed for looking suspicious. And now she knows. Something terrible is about to begin. And in the moment, Monica leaned over to check the gas pump. The breath fogging up the windshield behind her wasn't just from the cool weather. It came from a pair of cold eyes, watching, assessing, and calculating. Less than 20 paces away, a Lancaster Police Department Crown Victoria patrol car sat by the tire inflation area, its engine still humming softly in the dark, as if it had never turned off since it first arrived. Inside the car, the glow from the radio screen reflected on two contrasting faces, both frightening in their own right. Sergeant Rick Holloway, sitting in the driver's seat, was a man in his 40s with sunburned, mottled skin, signs of someone who had spent too much time under the sun, caring only about power in his uniform. His square jaw, clenched even when not speaking, and his eyes, never staying on the person's face but always scanning the stomach, pockets, and waistband, suggested that everyone carried a potential threat. Holloway had been reported internally twice for excessive interaction with female suspects, but never disciplined. He knew the law, and he knew how to bend it. Beside him was Officer Travis Doyle, younger, leaner, with a quietly menacing demeanor that was hard to pinpoint. His hair was cut close like a Marine's, his high cheekbones and hollow eyes constantly narrowed as if perpetually sleep-deprived, but in reality morally bankrupt. Doyle had a habit of cracking his knuckles every few minutes, as if his hands itched to strike something. In his 3 years on the force, he had been filmed by locals dragging a black teen across the parking lot in handcuffs, but justified it by claiming the suspect resisted. The review board had insufficient evidence to charge him. They had been parked there for over 10 minutes. No alarm, no clear patrol reason. They just sat, watching. And then, like predators stalking their prey in the dark, they saw Monica step out of the car. "Look at that," Doyle said, lifting his paper coffee cup to his lips, blowing lightly on it before speaking in a flat tone. "Black woman, pregnant, new Accord, aftermarket rims, and she's wearing scrubs." Holloway didn't respond right away. He glanced through the rearview mirror, his finger tapping lightly on the steering wheel, marking time to an old rhythm of control and contempt. Finally, he sneered, a twisted, venomous smile forming on his face. "That's not her car. Probably some boyfriend's, or stolen. Looks familiar, though. Want to go ask her?" Doyle smirked, as if this were some sort of nighttime hunting game. "Yeah, but slow," Holloway replied, rolling down the window and letting the light rain slap half of his face. "Let's walk. No need to rush. We've got all night." They stepped out of the car. No lights, no radio chatter, no mention of any suspicious activity. No need. They believed that here, in this desolate area, with no cameras and no witnesses, power belonged to them. Their footsteps echoed faintly on the wet concrete. The sound of Holloway's boots striking the pavement reverberated through the mist. The sharp, dry sound like an unspoken announcement. "We've arrived." Monica heard the noise. She looked up and saw the two figures walking toward her, both in uniform but carrying no protection in their demeanor. Her expression shifted. No longer weary but prepared, as though she had been in situations like this before. But this time it was different. She was pregnant, and her son was sitting right behind her, in a locked car that couldn't stop violence if it happened. She placed a hand on her belly reflexively, then met their gaze as they stopped in front of her. "Good evening, ma'am." Holloway spoke first, his voice anything but friendly, scraping through the misty night air. Doyle walked around the back, his eyes glued to the license plate as if just waiting to find something to pin on her. "Is this your car?" Holloway asked, his gaze moving from the name tag on Monica's chest down to her wet shoes, completely bypassing her eyes and the visible pregnant belly. Monica didn't step back. Her voice was calm. "Yes, I bought it last month. Paperwork's in order. Plates are valid." She began pulling out her wallet carefully and slowly, so as not to be accused of pulling something out of her bag. But as she did this, Holloway didn't look at the paperwork. He just looked at her as though she had no name, no right to be here, and no reason to exist at this moment. Inside the car, Elijah sat up straight. His eyes never left the scene unfolding outside. The initial fear didn't come from the shouting or the sirens. It came from the way his mother stood so stiffly, so tense, speaking in a voice slower than usual. Outside, in the continuing light drizzle, as if nature itself couldn't interfere with this moment, the two men stood there, as if nothing had begun, but also as if everything had already been planned. The moment Monica reached for her wallet, moving slowly and cautiously as if any quicker motion might be deemed a threat, Doyle sneered from behind the car. "Look at that. Black woman, new Accord, aftermarket rims. She doesn't look like the owner." Monica heard it. The words weren't disguised. They weren't muttered. They were spoken loudly enough to pierce through the thin rain, enough for the pregnant woman standing before the officers to hear, and enough for Elijah in the car to look up, his hand dropping the pen he had been holding. Holloway glanced at his partner, then let out a short, mocking laugh. "Go check it out." He emphasized the word check in a drawn-out tone, as if talking about a wild animal needing to be muzzled, not a pregnant citizen who had just finished a shift at the city hospital. Both officers began to move closer, not hurriedly, not noisily, but with a calm arrogance, the stride of those who know that, in a place with no cameras and no witnesses, they are the law. Monica had encountered this type before, not in the hospital, but during random traffic stops, in the contemptuous glares at bank counters, in the questions like, "What kind of job do you have that you drive a car like this?" But this time, it was different. This time, she was pregnant. This time, her son was watching every word, every gesture, every glance. "Do you live around here?" Holloway asked, his voice trying to sound friendly, but his gaze drifting over her belly as if the presence of her child were an added crime. Monica answered evenly, neither cold nor soft. "I live at 418 Jefferson Street. I work at River Valley, night shift." Doyle circled to the other side of the car. Elijah turned his head to watch, sitting up straight in his seat but keeping his mask on, covering half his face. He quickly tucked his phone under his jacket, pressing the record button, silently marking the time, 9:38 p.m. "Whose name is this car registered under?" Holloway asked next, not waiting for a response but starting to tap his fingers on the hood of the car, creating a series of annoying tapping sounds like an interrogation. Monica pulled out her paperwork, clearly showing her name on the registration. Monica Elise Carter. But Holloway didn't bother to look closely. He took the paper, skimmed it once as if just going through the motions, then flipped it over, as if hoping to find something wrong. "You know," he said, "this car doesn't really fit you." "Because I'm pregnant?" Monica asked, her voice starting to soften. But not from fear, from fatigue. "Because you're a nurse, working the night shift, and still afford a new car," he replied, the corner of his mouth curling up with unmistakable envy and bigotry. This wasn't the first time Monica had heard that, and she knew it wasn't just about the car. It was an accusation disguised as an interrogation. That a pregnant black woman living in a middle-class neighborhood, driving a new car, wearing medical scrubs, was suspicious. Doyle, meanwhile, was still staring at Elijah through the rear window. "That's your kid in the car?" he said loudly. "He's a big one. 10 years old, looks like 14. Elijah stayed silent. Monica nodded, maintaining her stance. His name's Elijah. 10 years old, he's studying. At this hour, out here, Doyle scoffed, his eyes flashing with some strange excitement. You think this is a safe place for your kid? Monica felt her hand tighten around the gas nozzle. Not out of fear, but out of anger. She had the right to park her car, the right to be pregnant, the right to be a nurse, the right to be a mother. And she didn't need anyone's permission to be left alone at a gas station at 9:30 p.m. Is there something wrong with me taking my son home after work? She asked, her gaze locking with Holloway's. Nothing wrong, he replied, then bent down again as if looking for a scratch on the surface of the car. Just a little unusual. Unusual, that's the term they use to mask their racism. And inside the Accord, Elijah was quietly recording it all, his hand trembling slightly, but his eyes wide open, watching. Because he knew this wasn't normal anymore. Monica tightened her grip on the gas nozzle, trying to keep her voice steady, as she always had when calming down panicked patients. Good evening, officers, she said, her expression calm to the point of neutrality. Is something wrong? But Sergeant Holloway's gaze didn't meet hers. Instead, he looked past her, scanning her visibly pregnant belly under the damp scrubs, then down to her soaked Converse shoes, then to the car's license plate. Each glance was like a step in a logic problem of prejudice he had already figured out long before stepping out of the patrol car. Is this your car? He asked, his voice dry, not to inquire but to confirm a suspicion he had made up in his mind before ever leaving the car. Yes, Monica replied, slowly pulling her wallet from her coat pocket. Her movements were deliberate and clear, as if any faster motion could be interpreted as threatening. She took out the car registration, insurance, driver's license, and her nurse's ID with the River Valley Hospital badge. I bought it last month. It's registered in my name. Insurance is up to date. The plates are valid. I work the night shift in the ER. Doyle glanced over her nurse's ID and then waved his hand dismissively. Who doesn't work the night shift at hospitals these days? He muttered. Hospitals hire all sorts of people now. Holloway took the stack of papers but didn't open them. He held them loosely in his hand, his eyes still fixed on Monica as if the papers were just a curtain for what he truly wanted to see, fear. But Monica didn't give him that. What department do you work in? He asked, still in the same flat tone, but now lower and deeper, as if asking not for professional reasons but looking for a crack to exploit. Emergency department, Monica replied, her gaze unwavering. Holloway tilted his head, a half smile appearing as though he had just caught someone in a lie, even though there was nothing wrong with Monica's answer. Honestly, you don't look like the type to drive a car like this. That statement hung in the air like a slash to her self-respect. No knife, no gun, just pure prejudice. Monica paused for a moment. Not out of surprise, but because she had heard it before. In the supermarket, when swiping her credit card. At the OBGYN, when the receptionist asked where her other 3 kids were. At the bank, when they told her to sign additional paperwork because the amount was a little high. But what hurt the most was that her son, Elijah, was listening to these words, watching from the car window with silent eyes, learning the first lesson about how the world perceives people like his mother. Monica stood straight, her hands still positioned firmly in front of her belly, like an invisible shield protecting the child within. What do you mean by that? She asked, not challenging, not weak. Just a simple question, coming from a throat accustomed to bearing the weight of too many pressures without breaking. Holloway didn't answer immediately. He smirked, let out a small hiss through his teeth, and then shot a look at the car once more. It's just strange. A pregnant woman driving this car at this hour in scrubs seems off. Doyle stepped forward from behind, suddenly interjecting, "Where are you headed at this hour? This isn't a place for a midnight stroll." "I'm going home," Monica replied. "This is the nearest gas station. I need to fill up. My son's in the car. We just want to go home." "Home, huh?" Doyle repeated, as if it was an extravagant concept. Home with a new car, fancy plates, paperwork printed just last week, and inside the car, a big kid with a mask sitting there like he's hiding something. Monica breathed slowly. Every word they said was like a stone thrown into still water, not to uncover the truth but to stir the surface. Their words didn't need evidence. They only needed to be spoken loudly, often, and at the right time, when no one else could verify them. At that moment, Elijah was biting his lip, his eyes looking at his mother with an expression no longer innocent, but a conscious worry, fear now taking shape. He quietly reached for his tablet, leaned toward the car window and slowly pulled out his phone from his jacket pocket. With trembling fingers, he typed a short message. "Uncle M, come quick." Mom's being held by the cops. Gas station. Highway 43. And as his finger pressed send, the wind suddenly picked up. The message just sent, Elijah gripped the phone tightly and pulled his hoodie down further, covering his head. The screen dimmed, and instead he switched to voice recording mode. He pressed and held the button, swiping lightly over the microphone icon, then tucked the phone inside his jacket, where his heart was pounding like a war drum. Each breath was short and shallow, but he still tried to remain silent. He knew, this time, he couldn't give himself away. Outside, the wind suddenly picked up, sweeping across the cold concrete of the gas station, making the faint, open LED sign above the convenience store window flutter weakly. Monica looked up at the faint clattering sound, her instincts urging her to glance in that direction. And that was when she saw it. A piece of white paper stuck crookedly on the rain-drenched window, hastily affixed with 2 cheap strips of tape. Under the flickering light, it took Monica a few seconds to read the black printed words on the paper. Security camera, temporarily out of service, under maintenance. Her heart tightened, not because of the message, but because of the timing, the context. Everything suddenly fell into place in her mind like a terrifying jigsaw puzzle. An empty gas station, no one around, no attendants, no other customers. 2 officers with openly malicious glares. A camera that wouldn't capture anything. And her, a black pregnant woman, unarmed, with no witnesses, just her son in the car and a phone that may or may not have recorded anything in time. She swallowed hard. Not because she was thirsty, but because her throat had gone dry without her realizing it. The cold breeze that passed through her jacket made her shiver, but it wasn't as cold as the gaze from behind her. Holloway's eyes still trying to break down each layer of composure she had, as if probing the final boundary between cooperation and fear. "You all right?" Holloway asked, his tone no longer pretending to be friendly. "Stressed out? Just noticed that sign?" Monica turned her head toward him, her expression unchanged. But her eyes, those had changed. No longer filled with the need for approval, they now carried a watchful look, deep and heavy like the darkness behind closed gas station lights. "No," she replied, her voice low and clear. "I was just remembering. I shouldn't have stopped here tonight." Holloway chuckled dryly, a sound with no humor, echoing in the empty space like metal scraping against glass. Doyle had returned, and now stood behind Monica, his arms crossed, his fingers rhythmically tapping on his own arm, as if counting the seconds, waiting for something to happen. "Here's the deal," Doyle said, his voice light but carrying an undercurrent of absolute control. "We got a report, a silver Accord, plates almost identical to yours, involved in a violation, just a quick check." Monica knew that was an excuse. They hadn't even properly looked at the plate she had handed them. The registration was still in their hands like a useless piece of paper. This wasn't a check. This was a targeted hunt. "I've provided all my documents," she said, her voice even, trying to keep calm. "If you need further verification, I'm happy to cooperate, but I want to keep a safe distance. I'm pregnant. My son is in the car. I need him to be at peace." "Your son, huh?" Doyle slowly turned and looked through the window. "That kid looks a little old for his age. You people like to claim lower ages for benefits, don't you?" Monica narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," Holloway interjected, "just observing. Besides, at this hour, your kid's out here, in this area, late at night, not in school. Pretty unusual, don't you think?" "We just left the hospital. I finished my night shift," Monica replied, her teeth clenched lightly, her hand gripping the gas nozzle tighter. "I haven't broken any laws." Doyle took a step forward. "Not breaking the law doesn't mean you're not suspicious." He said it like a declaration, a confession, unapologetic about how they saw the world. For them, Monica's skin color was reason enough to act. Nothing more was needed. Inside the car, Elijah was starting to feel short of breath. He didn't know if it was the asthma coming on, or if the air around him had thickened like glue. He gripped his inhaler, not pressing it yet, but holding it tightly in his hand, like the only weapon he had in the middle of a conflict where he was just caught in between. He lowered himself slightly, adjusting the position of the phone inside his jacket. The red light of the recording function was still blinking steadily. He whispered almost inaudibly, "Mom's in danger. Police, patrol car, Highway 43 gas station." He repeated it a few times, just enough for the sound to get into the microphone. He didn't know if it would help, but he knew he had to do something. Outside, Monica glanced from Doyle to Holloway, then quickly looked toward the white paper stuck to the store's window. The paper fluttered in the wind, its edges almost peeling off the glass, like a fragile warning that everything was about to spiral out of control. "You still haven't returned my documents," she said, for the first time, her voice shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from anger. "We're not done yet," Holloway said, then took a step closer, so close Monica could smell the old coffee and cigarette smoke soaked into his jacket. "You know how many times we hear things like you? I'm a nurse, I'm just working, I just want to go home. The problem is, do you think working means you can't be a criminal?" Monica stepped back half a step, not out of fear, but because her stomach had tightened slightly. A wave of tension spread from her lower back up to her hips. She knew the feeling. It wasn't labor pains, but it was a warning sign that her body wasn't okay, and the pressure of the situation was enough to affect her baby. "I want my papers back, and I won't answer anything more without clear legal cause," she said slowly but firmly. Holloway didn't answer. He grabbed the stack of papers and suddenly threw them down onto the wet concrete. The registration, the insurance card, even the nurse's ID flew up into the air, landing in a puddle of oil by Monica's tire. "Pick it up if you still want to keep it," he said, a cold smile on his lips. "Otherwise, we can hold on to it for you." Monica bent down slowly, not taking her eyes off the two men standing there like talking shadows. When her hand touched the edge of the wet paper, she felt the cold seep from her fingertips into her bones. Not because of the weather, but because she knew the real storm was getting very close. As Monica bent down to pick up the papers from the oily puddle, Doyle's footsteps echoed behind her. The sound of his heels tapping on the wet concrete was like a countdown in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. He was circling to the back of the car, saying nothing, offering no explanation, and certainly not asking for permission. Just the way his hand rested on the rear window of the Honda Accord was enough for Monica to understand. The line between checking and trespassing was being erased inch by inch. Holloway didn't move much. He stood there, close enough that Monica could feel his breath in the air between them, a mixture of stale coffee, cheap cigarettes, and a habitual disdain. He lowered his head, not out of politeness but out of coercion, as if forcing her to look straight into his mouth as he spoke. "Is there anything in the car?" he asked, his voice dry. Monica lifted her face, her eyes no longer avoiding his, but now reflecting the look of a mother who knew that any answer she gave could be used to push her into danger. Yet she still maintained an extraordinary calm, even though her throat felt dry and her back ached from standing under the constant pressure for over 15 minutes. "Just my son," she said slowly, clearly. "He's doing his homework." That simple answer, which should have ended any suspicion, only made Doyle, now pressed up against the rear window, squint and smirk. "Is that so?" he said loudly, ensuring Monica could hear. "He's a big kid, 10 years old, doesn't look like 10. You sure he's your son?" Monica froze for a moment, not because of the question, but because of what lay behind it. The calculated insult, a deliberate attempt to provoke an emotional reaction, and then use that reaction as a reason to intervene. They didn't need a legal reason, they just needed an excuse. "Are you accusing me of kidnapping my own child?" she asked, her voice not raised, but heavy as lead. "We're not saying that," Doyle responded, still not taking his eyes off Elijah in the car. "Just seems strange. Does he look like your son? Got any proof?" Monica laughed, not because she found it funny, but because she had no other way to push back against the absurdity. "This is a gas station, not a border checkpoint. And you just called my son that kid." Holloway raised his chin, the smirk disappearing. The air suddenly thickened, as if an invisible string had been pulled tight to the breaking point. "You know," he said, his voice low enough to almost be a mumble, "this isn't how polite citizens talk to the police." "I'm speaking as a citizen," Monica replied, still holding the wet papers in her hand. "Not rude, I just don't cower." At that moment, Holloway took another step forward. His hand snatched the papers from her. No need to look at them, just to take them away. Monica stood still, offering no resistance, but her eyes now blazed with fire, no longer neutral. She knew that what she was holding wasn't just paperwork, but the dignity of a mother, and now it was being crushed under the heel of unchecked power. Inside the car, Elijah was trembling. He couldn't hear every word, but he saw everything. How his mother was surrounded, how the silver-haired man was getting red in the face with anger, how the other one leaned forward against the window like a bloodhound, sniffing for a scent. Elijah's hand tightened around the inhaler, the sweat on his palm making the plastic slippery, but he still held on. He tried to take a deep breath, but his lungs began to ache. The air in the car wasn't enough, and the asthma, like a slow-moving snake, began to coil inside his chest. Doyle suddenly knocked on the window, startling Elijah. "Hey, kid," he called out, his voice taunting. "Your mom's kid? Answer me." Elijah didn't respond. Monica yelled out, for the first time her voice cracking. "Don't scare my son. He has asthma. He can't handle stress like this." "Asthma?" Doyle burst out laughing. "Sure, right. Another fake asthma to get benefits." Monica couldn't believe her ears. She whipped around. "What did you just say?" "I mean," Doyle shrugged. "Isn't it convenient? Nurse mom, asthmatic kid, new car, stopping in the middle of the night. Everything just fits, just missing the happy family confirmation papers." Holloway nodded slightly, signaling something to Doyle. Then he asked, his voice now openly threatening, "Got anything in the trunk? Drugs? Prescription painkillers? Medical waste? Can we check?" "No," Monica said. "Nothing. And you don't have a search warrant. I don't consent." "Oh, but what if you're hiding something?" Holloway stepped closer, now nearly at her stomach. "Do you know refusing to cooperate could make everything worse?" And then, without warning, his hand reached toward Monica's coat pocket. Monica jerked back reflexively. "Don't touch me," she said, her breath beginning to quicken. "Calm down," Holloway said, his hand still not pulling back. "I'm just checking if you've got a weapon." "I'm pregnant," Monica nearly screamed. "I'm a woman. I'm not carrying anything but a water bottle and car keys. If you touch me again, I'll consider it assault." A moment of silence passed. Then Doyle broke it with his flat, mocking tone. "The thing is, do you think your words are more important than those of 2 police officers?" And in that instant, every boundary had been erased. Monica flinched slightly, not from fear, but from muscle strain. The muscles in her lower back tightened into painful bands, signaling that her body was reacting to the extreme pressure. But even as her stomach tightened and her breathing became heavy, she kept her voice steady, each word anchoring itself in the thin air of the night. "Give me back my papers." Holloway, with his usual twisted smile, didn't respond. He stared at Monica for a few seconds, as if assessing how much longer she would keep her composure, then suddenly threw all the papers onto the cold, wet concrete as if discarding trash. The nurse's ID slid across the oily ground, clearly displaying the words Monica Elise Carter, registered nurse, River Valley Medical Center, before stopping under the car. "Don't mess with the police," he muttered, his voice dry, like it was scraping through his teeth. "Is this how you raise your kids, where you live?" That sentence struck at a long history of insults and discrimination that Monica, though she had learned to endure, would never grow accustomed to. But she didn't respond. Not because she had nothing to say, but because something else had taken over her consciousness entirely, the faint yet haunting sound coming from the car, heavy breathing. Elijah. Monica whipped around. She looked through the window and saw her son sitting hunched over to one side, his hand clutching his chest. His mask had fallen below his chin, and his lips had turned a pale gray. Elijah's eyes were wide, blinking rapidly, as though he was trying to stay conscious in air that was rapidly becoming unbreathable. In an instant, Monica's entire world froze. "My son. He can't breathe," she whispered, not out of fear, but because her throat had tightened. "What?" Doyle asked, still standing at the back of the car. "He has asthma," Monica screamed. "I told you, he needs his inhaler now." Holloway glanced inside the car through the rear window, frowning. "He doesn't look like he's struggling to breathe. Kids are great at acting, especially when their mothers know how to make up stories." "Elijah!" Monica slammed her hand on the window. "Elijah, listen to me. Get the inhaler. Now!" Inside, Elijah struggled. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out the inhaler, but his fingers were trembling so badly he couldn't press it. His chest tightened like it was being squeezed by an invisible cord. Each breath came out as a dry wheeze, as though his lungs were screaming for help. "Mom, I can't breathe." Elijah managed to whisper, but his voice was barely audible, like a breath lost in a snowstorm. "Stop faking!" Doyle suddenly shouted, then did the unthinkable. He yanked the back door open, reached in and slapped Elijah's hand, knocking the inhaler out of his grip. "No kid's gonna fake an episode to get his mom out of trouble," he snarled, then slammed the door shut. "Are you insane?" Monica screamed, losing her composure. She lunged, trying to open the back door. Holloway stopped her with one hand, his voice harsh. "Step back. You're resisting." "I'm not resisting," Monica yelled. "My son needs to breathe. He's going to die if you don't let me." Before she could finish, Doyle grabbed Monica's arm from behind, twisting it painfully behind her back. The pain shot down from her shoulder to her hip, forcing her to collapse halfway, her knees crashing against the wet ground. "You're resisting an officer," he shouted in her ear. "We have the right to detain you." "You're going to kill my son," she cried. "I'm pregnant and you—" "Elijah!" she screamed, the cry of a mother being torn apart from within, no longer caring who heard, who saw, only the purest instinct to protect her child. Inside the car, Elijah had slumped to one side, his hand searching for the inhaler that had fallen to the floor. His eyes were wide, pupils slightly dilated. One hand reached toward the front seat, trying to touch anything that could bring him closer to a source of oxygen. But there was nothing but emptiness. The tightening in his chest made every sound from Elijah's mouth just a dry gasp. Monica, while being forced down by Doyle, turned to see the inhaler on the floor of the car, glowing faintly under the dim yellow light. With a strength she didn't know she had, she broke free from Doyle's grip in an instant, just enough to lunge forward, open the back door, reach in, grab the inhaler, and put it in her son's hand. "Elijah, press hard, now!" she gasped, her eyes filled with tears. The boy tried with all his remaining strength, squeezing the inhaler and taking a long, desperate breath. A small sound, click, like a gunshot in the quiet night. He leaned back against the seat, gasping for air. His lips started to regain their color. He was still alive, but he had narrowly escaped death. Immediately, Doyle yanked Monica back, his hand gripping her wrist like steel. "That's enough. You've just committed another crime, obstructing justice, resisting arrest, and approaching a dangerous object." Monica screamed in pain. Her belly pressed hard against the side of the car as Doyle dragged her forward. "What the hell are you doing?" Elijah screamed from inside the car, his voice still weak but sharp like an alarm bell ringing for the last time before everything shatters. "Now, the kid's talking back too?" Holloway hissed. "What do you two think you are, above the law?" Monica no longer felt fear. In her tear-streaked eyes, there was no longer pleading, only fire. The fire of losing control, of a mother who had been pushed too far. She no longer cared about keeping calm. She only knew one thing. Her child almost died, and no one had the right to do that to them. And when Doyle tightened his grip on her wrist again, the other hand reaching for the handcuffs at his belt, the sound rang out, not a scream, not a breath, but the screech of tires sliding across wet concrete. A black SUV sped into the gas station lot, headlights flashing bright, shining straight onto the scene like a beam of light from the highest court. The black SUV sped into the gas station lot like a shadow tearing through the night, but Monica didn't have time to realize it. In that moment, before the headlights even reached her body, pressed against the cold hood of the car, she had only one thought: Call Malcolm. Immediately. Her hand fumbled into her coat pocket, pulling out the waterlogged phone. Her fingers slid across the screen, tapping the quick call icon with the familiar name, Uncle M. But before she could press the button, a blow struck her wrist like a hammer. Thud! The phone flew out of Monica's hand, crashing to the concrete, bouncing twice before coming to a stop under the car's rear. The screen shattered. A corner of the screen curled up, and the final ting of the sound rang out like the death knell of her last hope. Holloway hissed, his voice like metal scraping. I told you. No one's calling anyone while we're talking. You're violating my civil rights, Monica screamed, stepping toward him. Shut up, Holloway yelled, then shoved her hard into the car's body with both hands. Monica stumbled backward, her back slamming into the cold metal, and most importantly, her stomach was pressed between her body and the car. The baby inside her suddenly reacted, a sharp contraction tightening around her lower abdomen, making Monica cry out in pain. Stop, she screamed, clutching her belly instinctively, like a mother about to give birth. I'm pregnant. Doyle, like a hungry animal sensing blood, immediately rushed in from behind, grabbing her wrist and squeezing until her skin turned white. You're resisting, he yelled, as though his own shouting could turn violence into law. I'm just protecting myself and my child. Monica struggled, but her arms were twisted behind her, her back still pressed against the cold hood, her stomach hardening, her lungs tightening from the pain. I told you, stop! Doyle screamed again, then yanked her arm so forcefully that Monica's entire body twisted, almost losing her balance. He dragged her toward the rear of the car like pulling a sack of potatoes, not caring that she was pregnant, not caring that she had just saved her son's life. He just wanted power, and he wanted to exert it. Who do you think you are? Holloway snarled, following behind. A nurse in scrubs means nothing. A black mother with a sick kid, now sitting here playing a game and making calls. Monica fought to stand tall, struggling to stay calm, but her back felt like it was breaking, her stomach contracting in waves, and dizziness swept over her like a tidal wave. She turned to look at her son. Elijah was slumped over in the back seat, his hand gripping the inhaler, his face pale. He had just managed to breathe again, but his eyes were still wide, filled with fear. My son almost died. And you? Monica's voice cracked, unable to finish the sentence. She didn't need to say more. What was happening was already enough. Doyle, still seething with rage, pulled out the handcuffs from his belt, throwing them onto the hood with a clang, like the sound of a sword hitting stone. Put your hands behind your back. Now, he barked. Monica took half a step back, her mind spinning. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not resisting. I'm pregnant. My son is in the car and almost died. Holloway stepped forward, pointing at her face. You think we care about that? You just broke free from my partner. You grabbed things out of his hands. You yelled in our faces. That's resisting. No, Monica said, her voice cracking for the first time, not from fear, but from helplessness, because she knew this wasn't something new. It had been happening for centuries, from screams being silenced in the woods to desperate hands raised in front of gun barrels. And now it was repeating itself, on the body of a pregnant mother in a desolate gas station, under the hands of two men in uniform. Holloway lunged at her. Doyle raised the cuffs. And then, everything changed. From the far end of the parking lot, headlights blazed brightly, cutting through the darkness like the sun in the night. The sound of tires screeching on the wet pavement rang out like the bell of salvation. The black SUV skidded to a halt, sliding sideways across the lot, its headlights shining directly at Holloway and Doyle, as though a pair of stage lights were exposing their guilt in the middle of a real-life drama. Both officers froze for a moment. Doyle raised his hand to shield his eyes, taking a half-step back. Holloway turned toward the headlights, his hand moving to his belt, where his gun rested like an instinct. But he didn't pull it out. Something about the stance from the SUV made him hesitate. The car door opened. A pair of black leather shoes stepped out first. The man's face was still in shadow, but the dark gray suit, the long coat, the thin gloves on his hands, and the way he stood upright, all of it made the entire atmosphere around them freeze. Monica turned her head, still gasping for breath, her eyes blurred with tears, her belly contracting with every painful cramp. But when she saw him, a thin, weak smile, yet bright as a spark in the rain, flickered across her face. "Malcolm," she whispered. Holloway took a half-step forward, his voice tense. "Who are you? Get out of this area or—" The man didn't respond immediately. He pulled a thin leather wallet from his pocket, opening it in front of them. A bright gold badge shone under the headlights. Mayor, City of Lancaster. The man spoke in a low voice, sharp as steel, forged in fire. "I'm Malcolm Carter. I'm the mayor of this city, and the person you just assaulted is my sister." The moment Malcolm Carter pulled out his badge, standing still in the headlights like a shadow of justice descending upon the damp gas station, a harsh, violent cough erupted from inside the Honda Accord, interrupting everything. Elijah. The sound wasn't a regular cough. It was dry, wheezing, ragged, as though each cell in his lungs was screaming, desperately searching for oxygen. The asthma had hit. No longer a warning, no longer a sign, but a full-scale attack on the frail body of a 10-year-old child. "My son!" Monica screamed, almost instinctively. "He has asthma. He needs his inhaler, now!" She turned, about to rush toward the car, but Doyle, still stunned by Malcolm's appearance, reacted with the panic of someone whose position was threatened. He stepped out of the headlights shining into his face, maneuvered past Monica, and opened the back door of the car where Elijah was lying, trembling, his face turning blue. "Stop faking, kid," he yelled. "We're not stupid enough to fall for your act." Then, before anyone could stop him, Doyle swung his arm, slapping Elijah's wrist, knocking the inhaler from his hand, causing it to bounce off the car door and fall onto the floor mat, rolling into the dark space under the seat. Elijah let out a weak sound, barely audible, a hoarse, breathless moan, his eyes wide, mouth agape but unable to draw a full breath. His whole body contracted, his hands clenched, his lungs emptied. "Oh, God!" Monica screamed, losing all thought, all strategy. The motherly instinct exploded. She wrenched herself from Holloway's grip, lunging toward the open car door, diving into the back seat, reaching for the inhaler on the floor. "Elijah, take it, press it, now!" The boy, nearly out of strength, still managed to grab the inhaler with what little awareness was left. Monica supported his head, gripping his hand, positioning the inhaler, then pressing down firmly. Spray. A soft click. But to Monica, it was the sound of life. Elijah took a deep breath. His whole body jerked, then relaxed like a string being released. He leaned back against the seat, gasping for air, his eyes still wide but no longer struggling. His breathing began to return, fast, awkward, but real. "That kid sure can act," Doyle muttered, turning away with no remorse. "Did your mother teach you that trick?" "You just attacked my son," Monica screamed, clutching Elijah like a shield. her arms wrapped around her son's neck as her eyes fixed on the man standing just outside the car door. Holloway from behind yelled, "You just broke free from an officer's grip. You're under arrest. You're resisting." Monica didn't hear any more. Her ears rang with the sound of Elijah's labored breaths, her own heartbeat thudding like thunder in her chest, and the brutal truth that if she hadn't acted in those last 2 seconds, her son could have died. Doyle yanked her arm again, this time so forcefully that it twisted her wrist behind her back, making Monica cry out in pain. Her belly was twisted with her body, causing her to slump against the hood of the car. Elijah screamed, "Mom!" "He's resisting, Holloway," Doyle shouted. "Handcuff her." Holloway pulled out the cuffs, stepping forward. But before he could do anything, the headlights from the SUV shone directly into his face. And this time, the man standing in the light was no longer silent. Malcolm Carter's voice rang out, soft but carrying the authority of the law and the fury of blood. "Let go of my sister. Right now." The gas station fell silent. Doyle tightened his grip on Monica's arm one more time, but then, as if realizing something, he slowly released her. Monica fell against the car door, clutching her belly, shaking, but still wide-eyed, looking at Malcolm as if seeing a lighthouse after a storm. "Who the hell are you?" Holloway growled. Malcolm took another step forward. The heavy leather shoes slammed against the wet concrete with sharp, echoing steps, like a sword cleaving through the darkness. He raised the badge high. Malcolm Carter, Mayor of Lancaster, and the woman you just assaulted while her son was having an asthma attack is my sister. Doyle stepped back. Holloway froze. "We have the right to search." Holloway tried to speak. "No," Malcolm interrupted, his voice not loud, but each word hit like a hammer. "You don't have a warrant. You don't have a reason. There's nothing here but prejudice and abuse. And you've been recorded by the very boy you nearly killed." Elijah, still struggling to breathe, gently pulled the phone from under his hoodie, the screen lighting up with a blinking red dot. The recording was still running. Monica whispered, "He recorded everything, from start to finish." Malcolm nodded, his gaze never leaving the 2 police officers who were now pale. "I didn't come alone." And just then, 2 patrol cars from the Lancaster City Police Department stormed into the gas station like mini-storms, flashing red and blue lights across the lot. Cars' doors swung open. A commanding sergeant stepped out, eyes meeting Malcolm's, then nodded. "We've received an urgent report from the mayor's office," the sergeant said. "A directive to revoke the authority of these officers, Doyle and Holloway." Holloway, enraged, shouted, "You can't do that. This is an absurd order." Malcolm spoke again. "I can, and I will. And if either of you says one more word, I will recommend criminal charges for intentional harm against a pregnant woman and a minor." The gas station fell silent as a graveyard. Only the sound of the engines idling, the gentle patter of rain, and the faint breath of a 10-year-old boy finding his rhythm again in the back seat. Malcolm Carter's words rang out in the cold, damp air like a blade cutting through the web of lies Holloway and Doyle had spun for the past half hour. The 2 uniformed men, who had stood in positions of dominance almost predatory, suddenly shrank under the harsh white light of the SUV, still shining directly at them like an interrogation light on a stage of justice. "I'm Mayor Malcolm Carter." His voice didn't need to rise, but it overpowered the sound of the rain, the wind blowing through the gas station roof. "And the woman you're handling is my sister." Holloway hesitated for a moment, his hand still loosely gripping the cold metal handcuff. Doyle, for an instant, no longer squinted. no longer had that look of hostility, replaced by vague confusion mixed with panic, an emotion that only surfaced when power was unexpectedly reversed. She resisted, Doyle stammered, his voice cracking like glass hitting the floor. She broke free from my grip, and the kid faked an asthma attack to— "Shut up," Malcolm interrupted, but didn't move closer. He remained a few steps away, standing in the headlights, as if deliberately maintaining a distance. Not because he feared, but because real power doesn't need to close the gap to threaten. "I stand here tonight not as a brother," Malcolm said, his hand still raised high, holding the gleaming badge in the palm of his hand. "I stand here as the leader of this city, and I just witnessed 2 police officers, without a warrant, without evidence, without reason, use violence against a pregnant woman, in front of her son, in a gas station with no cameras, and now you dare justify it by calling the boy an actor?" Holloway clenched his jaw, glancing at the commanding officer who had just stepped down from the patrol car. "Are you going to let him give you orders? He's her family." The commanding officer, Sergeant Darren Ellis, a solidly built man with brown skin, holding a radio still open, spoke slowly, just one sentence. "Mr. Carter is not only the mayor, he's also a board member of the State Police Oversight Committee, and I just received a direct call from the regional commander requesting the immediate suspension of weapons and duties for both officers involved in this unlawful use of force." The entire gas station fell silent. No one moved. "So, you really believe their act?" Doyle snapped, his voice twisted with the rising shame. "A pregnant woman, a kid having trouble breathing, and some false accusations are enough to knock us out of the job?" Malcolm stepped forward. This time, he let go of all formalities. His voice dropped, but was sharp as a razor. "It's not their act, it's mine. I'm standing here. I heard my sister scream because her son almost died. I saw you jerk the arm of a pregnant woman, twist her body, throw her papers to the ground, slap an inhaler out of a 10-year-old asthmatic's hand. And I also saw you, only after my headlights turned on, start to look scared." Elijah was still sitting in the car, his head leaning against the window. His face was still pale, but his breathing had steadied. His eyes were fixed ahead, where the man in the gray suit, the one he called Uncle M, stood like a wall between violence and justice. The boy didn't understand everything happening, but there was one thing he knew for sure. This was the first time all night that his mother wasn't surrounded anymore. Monica leaned against the car door, her hand still on her belly, breathing raggedly, but her eyes no longer reflected the pleading of a mother. It was the look of a woman who would no longer stay silent. "We followed the proper procedure," Holloway retorted. "There's nothing wrong here." Malcolm turned to Sergeant Ellis. "I'm requesting the procedure to be followed." Ellis nodded, signaling for the 2 younger officers to approach. They were wearing gloves, their expressions neutral, no mockery, no contempt, just pure professionalism, a quality Holloway and Doyle had long forgotten. "Sergeant Rick Holloway, Officer Travis Doyle, by order of the mayor's office and the state commander, you are to surrender all weapons, badges, and will be taken to the precinct for investigation." "This is a joke," Doyle shouted, but no one responded. The 2 officers stepped forward, starting to remove the guns, radios, and badges from both men. Holloway slammed his belt down onto the hood. "Bastards," he hissed. "She should have stayed home if she didn't want to be checked." Malcolm didn't flinch. He stared directly at him, his eyes as cold as ice, capable of freezing anyone's rage. "You just sealed your fate, Holloway," he said slowly. "Keep going, and you'll go straight from the holding cell to the courtroom." In that moment, Holloway went silent. For the first time that night, he was no longer the one in control. He was just a man with his uniform stripped away, standing in the harsh white light of truth, no shadows left to hide in. And Monica, from where she stood, knew one thing. This system might not be perfect, but tonight at least, it didn't turn a blind eye. Malcolm Carter's words landed like a final blow in the cold night. "Keep going, and you'll end up in jail." The words weren't shouted. There were no pounding fists or extra threats, but they carried the weight of someone who was not only a mayor, but also a brother, a witness, a representative of uncompromising justice. For a few seconds, it felt like time stood still. The wind outside no longer howled. The rain wasn't heavy enough to drown out Monica's heavy breathing, the woman standing in the middle of the scene like a living witness. Her body tired from pregnancy, her shirt soaked, but her gaze unwavering, locked onto the two men who had almost taken her son's life just moments ago. Holloway looked at Malcolm, his face flushed with anger, but his hand no longer reached for his gun like before. His hand hung limp, shoulders slumped, and his eyes began to show the kind of confusion that those who live with power rarely recognize until it's too late. Doyle was different. He tried to regain his confidence like a wounded animal trying to intimidate one last time. "We have the right to detain anyone showing signs of resistance," he gritted. "She broke free from my hands. She charged into the car when told to stay still, and the kid..." "Shut up, Doyle." Sergeant Darren Ellis, the commanding officer from the Central Police Department, spoke, his voice low but full of authority. "You knocked the inhaler out of a child having an asthma attack while his mother was being assaulted. That action wasn't just an abuse of power. It was intentionally putting a minor's life in danger." Malcolm took a step forward toward his sister. Amidst the flickering light from the patrol car, he leaned slightly, placing his hand on Monica's shoulder, a simple gesture, yet one with deep symbolism. "My sister is not alone." Monica didn't say anything, but the way she looked up at Malcolm, eyes blurred with tears, face streaked with rain, yet still holding her chin up, was enough to make the new police team understand that this wasn't the first time she had to face this system alone. But maybe, this time, she wouldn't have to do it alone. Malcolm turned back, his voice now slow but firm. "Sergeant Ellis, by my authority as mayor of Lancaster, I hereby order the immediate suspension of weapons, badges, and all operational equipment of officers Rick Holloway and Travis Doyle." Ellis nodded. "We've received the directive. Officers Lambert, Simmons, proceed with the equipment seizure." Two young officers stepped forward. No words, no mocking looks, just professionalism. And that was what confused Holloway the most. Having his own colleagues disarm him, like stripping the clothes off a traitor. "This is humiliating," he muttered, but no longer shouted. He wasn't the intimidating officer anymore. Now, he was just a middle-aged man, stripped of his armor, standing in the harsh white light of truth. No shadows to hide in. Doyle was more resistant. When the gun was removed from his belt, he snarled, "You'll regret this. I have friends in the city. This is an abuse of power." "And I have a recording," Monica replied, the first words she spoke in nearly 3 minutes. Her voice was hoarse but clear. She turned her head to the car, where Elijah was now sitting, eyes closed, head resting against the seat, but his phone still blinking with the red light of the recording function. "That boy recorded everything," Malcolm continued, his voice now not filled with anger but cold as the sword of justice being drawn. "From the moment you approached the car, from the discriminatory remarks, to the act of throwing her papers, to the slap that nearly killed the boy for not having his inhaler. Ellis nodded. The recording will be processed and included in the holding file. Holloway sneered. So, now family members of officials can judge the scene? Just because you have connections, a video, you think that's enough to handcuff the police? Malcolm turned back for the last time. No, he said, not because I'm the mayor, but because you chose the wrong victim. Monica is not weak, Elijah does not stay silent, and I am not blind. As his words ended, an ambulance appeared at the end of the road, its siren just loud enough to tear apart the remaining silence. A female nurse stepped out first, walking quickly toward Monica, her expression both professional and worried. Malcolm turned to Ellis. I'm going with them to the hospital. I need to make sure there are no surprises from here on out. Understood, Ellis said, his voice firm. We'll escort. These two will be temporarily detained at the precinct under special holding conditions. No contact, no communication, no chance to tamper with records, Doyle growled. Holloway fell silent. Monica stood still. And Elijah, only he knew, had completely changed the way he saw the world tonight. Not just because of the cruelty, but for a simpler reason. Justice, when it arrives at the right moment, can truly save a life. The mayor's office in Lancaster had never been this quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes with politeness or ceremony, but the kind of silence that carries gravity, the calm after a storm, leaving the room filled with the dust of truth, where every word spoken felt as heavy as a verdict. Monica Carter sat in the corner of the room, on a dark leather chair that seemed to sink her pregnant body into the soft cushions. But her gaze was still direct, her back still straight, and her lips pressed together like someone who had survived a battle no one else had witnessed. Her left arm was wrapped in bandages from elbow to wrist, the white bandages slightly damp from the rain from the previous night. Her pregnant belly rising beneath a simple hoodie, still stained from the concrete floor where she had been shoved. Beside her was Elijah, the 10-year-old boy holding a paper cup of orange juice with both hands. His fingers were pale from the cold, but gripped it tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping the panic at bay. The boy didn't speak. His eyes were wide open, no longer filled with fear, but heavy with the exhaustion of someone who had already learned too much that they shouldn't know at his age. A large, flat screen was set up at the head of the conference table. The sound was turned on just loud enough not to echo, but still impossible to ignore. Malcolm Carter, now no longer the face of a brother but the leader of a city listening to its wounds being told through sound, stood opposite, one hand resting on the table, his eyes locked onto each frame as if he were trying to crush every second of injustice with his gaze. Click. The recording began. The sound of the rain tapping, a car pulling up, then Monica's voice came through, low, calm, polite. Hello, gentlemen, what's going on? Then Holloway's voice, Is this your car? A brief silence, then a soft laugh tinged with sarcasm. You don't look like the type of person who drives this kind of car. No one in the room moved. The next sound was paper being thrown to the ground. Thunk. Doyle's voice. She doesn't look like your kid. Monica's voice screamed, Don't scare my son, he has asthma. Then a sharp sound, a slap, was heard. The inhaler knocked from the boy's hand. The ragged, gasping breaths followed, then a child's interrupted scream. Mom, I can't breathe. Elijah curled up on the chair. He didn't cry, but his hand tightened around the straw in the orange juice cup, nearly crushing it. Malcolm didn't look at his son. He looked at the screen, as if each sound was a slap to the honor he had built over years in the political system. The recording continued. Monica's voice screamed, He needs his inhaler, please! The sound of the car door opening. Someone's voice hissing, "He's faking it." Then came a scuffle, sound of a zipper, the hood of the car opening. And finally, Monica's almost primal scream. "Mom's here! Elijah, press it! Now!" Then came the breathing, repeating, gasping, spray, wheeze, then silence. Malcolm reached forward to stop the video. The room fell into complete silence. Monica leaned over, placing her hand on her son's shoulder. The gesture was gentle, as though afraid to startle Elijah, but also a silent thank you. "That child," a voice spoke from the far end of the table. It was the city's chief attorney, Teresa Kimball, who had watched the entire recording, "is not just a witness. He's the only one who kept evidence in a scene with no cameras, no outside witnesses, and was staged to be completely detrimental to his mother." The whole room now felt like an unofficial courtroom. No gavel, no jury, but everyone inside understood. The crime had been recorded, and no one could erase it anymore. Malcolm nodded. "We'll hold a press conference in 6 hours. No fluff, no flag backdrops, no prepared speeches, just the truth and accountability." Monica raised her head. "You plan to go public with this?" Malcolm looked at her, his eyes softening for the first time. "This is no longer just about you, Monica. Last night it became the story of the entire city, and you're not the only black woman who has been through this, but maybe you're the first one with the proof, and your son is the first one to record it." Teresa Kimball nodded in agreement. "We'll need to authenticate the recording, cross-reference times, witness statements from the patrol team, and the ambulance's cameras." "Do it," Malcolm said, "and do it fast, because I won't let anyone say this city shields violence just because it wears blue uniforms." Monica gently squeezed Elijah's hand, whispering like the wind, "You saved me. Do you know that?" Elijah didn't say anything, but for the first time since entering the room, he nodded. 2 weeks after that fateful night, the city of Lancaster entered the largest trial it had seen in 10 years. There were no media vans lining the streets, no political banners or shouting crowds outside, but the people filled the courtroom, one by one, quiet, resolute. They didn't come out of curiosity, they came to witness. The courtroom wasn't large, but every seat was taken by familiar faces. The nurse in white scrubs just off her shift, the middle school teacher with reading glasses hanging from her collar, the single mother holding her child, sitting quietly in the back row, and the young black boys in neatly pressed shirts as if about to deliver graduation speeches. Not because they were preparing to speak, but because they knew today was the day to redefine what they believed in. Monica sat in the first witness chair of the day. Her left arm was still bruised from where Doyle had gripped it tightly, but her gaze was steady. She didn't wear hatred. She wore the gravity of a woman who had once been unheard, and this time she wouldn't let that happen again. Elijah sat in the front row, between Malcolm and Teresa Kimball. The 10-year-old boy said nothing. He didn't need to. His phone, backed up, authenticated, and stored through 3 layers of data, was stronger evidence than any testimony. Then the video played. There were no sobs, no chants, just the heaviness pressing down on each person's chest, like a cold stone. Familiar sounds filled the air, the sound of shoes tapping on concrete. Monica's voice, soft at first, then gradually growing into anger, desperation, and then Elijah, the cough, the wheezing, the mom ... The tone breaking like a snapped thread in midair. Some looked away, not because they couldn't bear it, but because they didn't need to look to know the truth was staring directly at the whole system. Holloway's defense attorney, a middle-aged man with a polished appearance, stood up when the video ended. He cleared his throat, clearly feeling the atmosphere in the room heavy enough to suffocate. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth, "we do not deny that the situation escalated beyond control, but my client acted under professional pressure. And let us remember, pregnant women often have strong emotional reactions. Pregnancy hormones can exaggerate small situations, causing misunderstandings." A small sound echoed, the snap of a pen breaking in the back row. Judge Renee Langston, known for her strictness but fairness, tilted her head. "Counselor, are you saying that the reaction of a woman who was unlawfully handcuffed, with her son unable to breathe and his inhaler taken away, is due to hormones?" No one laughed. No one needed to. The entire room understood that the defense had just disqualified itself. "That's not what I meant," the lawyer hastily backtracked. "Good," Judge Langston said coldly. "We'll let the jury make their own judgment." And then Elijah was called to the stand. Malcolm turned to place his hand on the boy's shoulder. Monica said nothing. She simply looked at her son with a gaze that only a mother who had witnessed her child almost die could have. A gaze not just full of love, but of respect. Elijah stepped up to the stand, slightly shorter than the microphone, but he didn't tremble. He only looked up when sworn in. His voice was small, but it rang out as though he had been waiting to say this his entire life. "I don't know what's right in law," Elijah said, "but I know my mom didn't do anything wrong. She just tried to get the inhaler for me. And I think, if no one had come that day, I probably would have died." Silence. A kind of silence that didn't need further proof. The plaintiff's attorney didn't ask anything more. No one dared to argue with a child speaking about his own breath. When Elijah stepped down from the stand, no one clapped. But the entire jury stood up, no one asked, no one signaled. They just did it as a reflex, an act to show what the law sometimes cannot say in words. The truth cannot be drowned out when it is recorded. 2 weeks after that fateful night, the city of Lancaster entered its biggest trial in a decade. There were no media vans blocking the streets, no political banners or shouting crowds outside, but the people filled the courtroom one by one, quiet, resolute. They didn't come out of curiosity. They came to witness. The courtroom wasn't large, but every seat was taken by familiar faces. The nurse in white scrubs just off her shift, the middle school teacher with reading glasses hanging from her collar, the single mother holding her child, sitting quietly in the back row, and the young black boys in neatly pressed shirts as if about to deliver graduation speeches. Not because they were preparing to speak, but because they knew today was the day to redefine what they believed in. Monica sat in the first witness chair of the day. Her left arm was still bruised from where Doyle had gripped it tightly, but her gaze was steady. She didn't wear hatred. She wore the gravity of a woman who had once been unheard. And this time, she wouldn't let that happen again. Elijah sat in the front row between Malcolm and Teresa Kimball. The 10-year-old boy said nothing. He didn't need to. His phone, backed up, authenticated, and stored through 3 layers of data, was stronger evidence than any testimony. Then the video played. There were no sobs, no chants, just the heaviness pressing down on each person's chest like a cold stone. Familiar sounds filled the air, the sound of shoes tapping on concrete. Monica's voice, soft at first, then gradually growing into anger, desperation, and then Elijah. The cough, the wheezing, the mom ... the tone breaking like a snapped thread in midair. Some looked away, not because they couldn't bear it, but because they didn't need to look to know the truth was staring directly at the whole system. Holloway's defense attorney, a middle-aged man with a polished appearance, stood up when the video ended. He cleared his throat, clearly feeling the atmosphere in the room heavy enough to suffocate. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth, "we do not deny that the situation escalated beyond control. But my client acted under professional pressure. And let us remember, pregnant women often have strong emotional reactions. Pregnancy hormones can exaggerate small situations, causing misunderstandings." A small sound echoed, the snap of a pen breaking in the back row. Judge Renee Langston, known for her strictness but fairness, tilted her head. "Counselor, are you saying that the reaction of a woman who was unlawfully handcuffed, with her son unable to breathe and his inhaler taken away, is due to hormones?" No one laughed. No one needed to. The entire room understood that the defense had just disqualified itself. "That's not what I meant," the lawyer hastily backtracked. "Good," Judge Langston said coldly. "We'll let the jury make their own judgment." And then Elijah was called to the stand. Malcolm turned to place his hand on the boy's shoulder. Monica said nothing. She simply looked at her son with a gaze that only a mother who had witnessed her child almost die could have, a gaze not just full of love, but of respect. Elijah stepped up to the stand, slightly shorter than the microphone, but he didn't tremble. He only looked up when sworn in. His voice was small, but it rang out as though he had been waiting to say this his entire life. "I don't know what's right in law," Elijah said, "but I know my mom didn't do anything wrong. She just tried to get the inhaler for me. And I think, if no one had come that day, I probably would have died." Silence. A kind of silence that didn't need further proof. The plaintiff's attorney didn't ask anything more. No one dared to argue with a child speaking about his own breath. When Elijah stepped down from the stand, no one clapped. But the entire jury stood up. No one asked. No one signaled. They just did it as a reflex. An act to show what the law sometimes cannot say in words. The truth cannot be drowned out when it is recorded. The atmosphere in the courtroom remained thick as the jury returned with the marked sheet. No one spoke aloud, but everyone, from Monica, Elijah, and Malcolm to those filling the back rows, understood. This was not just a verdict for two individuals, but a verdict for a system that had existed too long in the dark. Judge Renee Langston stood up straight, the gavel tapping firmly on the wooden desk. After reviewing the video evidence, audio, testimony from the parties involved, and comparing the defense with the actual events, the court rules. Defendants Rick Holloway and Travis Doyle are guilty of the following charges: using unlawful force against a pregnant woman, endangering the life of a minor, assaulting an unarmed citizen, falsifying reports to superiors and the investigating authorities. She paused for a moment. The court rules that both defendants are no longer fit to hold badges and are permanently stripped of the right to serve in any law enforcement agency at the state or federal level. Additional penalties will be proposed by the prosecution at the next sentencing hearing. But from today on, you are no longer agents of justice. You are merely lessons for justice. A soft click echoed as she placed the gavel down. Not harsh, not violent, but firm, like the final punctuation to a long-standing indictment. Holloway bowed his head, saying nothing. Doyle, however, continued to stare at Elijah. His gaze now no longer that of a predator, but of a man who had just been completely overthrown by a small child. The courtroom door swung open. Monica walked out first, gently resting her hand on her son's shoulder. People stood on either side of the aisle, no one pushing forward. No one called their names. No need. The silence was their honor. An older woman with gray hair stood at the end of the row on the right, quietly whispering as Monica passed. "Thank you for not staying silent." Monica paused for a moment. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded, as if speaking for all those who had been forced to stay silent, with no one standing beside them. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The wind blew gently across the old stone steps. In the yard, there was no shouting crowd. Only a few townspeople, some hospital staff in scrubs, a few teachers carrying briefcases, and a long, silent row of people witnessing something rare. Justice came late, but it came. Malcolm waited at the foot of the stairs. He stood there not as the mayor, but as an uncle, a brother, a citizen of a city awakening. In his hands was a small, polished wooden box, edged with brass and engraved with the name M. Carter, L.P.D. 2002. Elijah stopped when he called. "Kid." Malcolm bent down, opening the box. Inside was an old worn police badge, a few scratches along the edge. The 5-point star symbol still intact, gleaming in the early afternoon sunlight. "This is my badge," Malcolm said, his voice low. "Back when I was a patrol officer many years ago. I gave it up when I realized that sometimes a badge isn't enough to protect justice, if it's in the wrong hands." He placed the badge in Elijah's hand gently, like handing over a precious gem. "You don't need to become a cop," he continued. "You don't need to carry a gun, you don't need to wear a uniform, but you've done something many adults haven't. You brought light to the darkest places, by a touch, by a decision, by courage." Elijah looked at the badge in his hand. The boy didn't smile, but his eyes lit up, not because of the object, but because of its weight. It had weight, a promise. Monica stood behind her son. She didn't say anything, but when she looked at Malcolm, when she saw her brother handing over the badge like a token, she knew. Her family was no longer alone in the dark. And at the corner of the courthouse yard, a reporter captured that moment, not to sensationalize, but to preserve a rare image, when a child makes a choice, and the world is forced to listen. 3 weeks after the trial, on a sunny morning at Lancaster City Hall, the City Council held a special session. There were no banners, no slogans calling for action. But inside the meeting room, the light streaming through the large windows served as proof that something had changed, quietly but profoundly. A new resolution, hastily written in the days following the incident, edited by a team of lawyers, activists, and Monica Carter herself, was put up for a vote. Its name, the Elijah Carter Act. The text was brief but sharp as steel. All law enforcement personnel within the Lancaster city limits are required to activate personal recording devices, body cams, in all interactions with civilians. Any deliberate attempt to turn off, tamper with, or fail to use the body cam will be considered obstruction of justice and prosecuted as a criminal act, with a minimum sentence of 6 months in prison. The vote was not tense. It was almost ceremonial. The entire council was in agreement. No one mentioned the gas station incident by name, but everyone understood, if not for a brave 10-year-old boy, if not for the recording that echoed through the courtroom that day, the law would never have existed. Monica sat in the back row, not as a witness, but as an official advisor to the newly formed Civil Oversight Committee. She dressed simply, black pants, a gray shirt, her hair neatly tied back. No cameras focused on her. She didn't speak, but her name was in the meeting minutes, right beneath the name of the law. She didn't need the fame. She only needed to know. Next time, if a child like Elijah is threatened, the truth will not be buried in the dark. At school, Elijah returned to class like any other student. But he was no longer the skinny boy sitting at the back of the class with his mask always covering his face. He was quieter now, but his eyes held the maturity of someone who had seen the harsh truth of the world and still chose to move forward. On the playground, a friend joked, "Hey, Elijah, you want to be a cop when you grow up? You could even be the captain." Elijah looked at his friend and smiled softly. "No," he said. "I want to be a doctor, but I won't forget." The teacher repeated this answer during a parent-teacher meeting, not to praise, but as a reminder that some children are not just students, but living witnesses of history. Monica returned to River Valley Hospital the following week. She entered through the back door as she always had, still wearing the navy scrubs worn to the point of fading, her old nurse ID hanging in front of her. Her colleagues didn't applaud, they just nodded. A slow, deliberate nod, like the kind given to a doctor who just saved a difficult case. At the end of her shift, as she checked the blood pressure of an elderly patient, a black man with gray hair, a former steel mill worker, he gently held her hand before she stepped away. "You did what no one has dared to do in 20 years, he whispered. "Not because you shouted, but because you stood firm." Monica didn't respond. She just nodded, because she understood sometimes you don't need to become perfect justice. You just need a small crack in the wall of silence, enough to let the light through. A week later, in the main hall of the city hall, a simple frame was hung. A mobile phone placed on a table. Beside it, the old badge of Malcolm Carter, and behind it, a quote. "Truth does not wait for power. It only takes one person with enough courage to hold on to it." Elijah Carter, 10 years old. And beneath the frame, small letters printed on a brass plaque. "The living memory of the Elijah Carter Act for the protection every family deserves." Lancaster remained a small town, with injustices still continuing, whispers still behind closed doors, and conservatives still sitting quietly in their offices. But now, every new police uniform came with a body cam, and every officer knew, if they turn it off, they're not just breaking the rules, they're breaking a promise. A promise made by a 10-year-old boy who brought light to the darkest places. Elijah Carter was just a 10-year-old boy, but his actions did what dozens of reports, complaints, and cries for help couldn't do. Force the system to face the brutality it so often tried to hide. From one rainy night at the gas station, a phone hidden under a hoodie, a recording button pressed at just the right moment, a city woke up. A new law was enacted. 2 badges were stripped, and thousands of people realized that silence should never be the only choice. So, what about you? If you were in Elijah's shoes, would you press record, or would you stay silent and bow your head? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, hit like, share it so more people know the truth, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories as powerful as this one. Because sometimes justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins with a mom that no one can ignore.